Hello everyone, I'm Courtney McGrath from the Ability Co-op, and here with me today is Bethan Collins, who is one of the leaders of the Printing House Square Leaders Project. As the Disability Service transitions to Printing House Square, there will be rooms named after disabled Trinity graduates that have shown great example of leadership and activism. Hi Bethan, do you mind telling us a bit about yourself and what was your time studying in Trinity like?
That's a big question. So I studied occupational therapy in Trinity, and it's 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago now, which is hard to believe. So it was before we actually had a proper disability service. So the disability service came in after I had graduated. I think in the 90s, things were slightly different. We didn't have equality legislation. The context was different. However, I was absolutely adamant that I wanted to do occupational therapy, and had a lot of support in many ways. But I think things are different. So I had a volunteer who used to read things. So I'm blind. I had a volunteer who used to read things onto tape. I was the first blind occupational therapy student that they'd ever had. There were concerns about whether I could do the job, but also whether I could get through university. And I think as a result, I didn't necessarily, in the beginning, I was quite afraid to let people know that I couldn't see. It was only when I got into my third and fourth year that I became, I suppose, happier in my own skin. Is that the way you'd say it? I became more willing to, come out, I suppose, as a disabled person. And I was the Students' Union Officer for Students with Disabilities, and I was involved in a whole load of other things that I loved in university. So fundamentally, I absolutely loved my time in university, loved my time in Trinity. I became a scholar as well. And one of my amazing lecturers, I described, bullied me into doing school. She taught me in my second year, and every single week she'd stop me and say, "Are you going to do school? Are you going to do school?" And so I did, and I was the first occupational therapy scholar ever. And there are scholars now, but there weren't at the time. And that was an amazing experience, because suddenly I realised I got to meet other people at Commons, and we had the most amazing conversations at Commons. I got to live on campus, and obviously as a blind person, where getting around isn't always as easy. Living right on campus in the very recently done up GMB, as it was at the time, was just wonderful. And it also gave me the potential to go on and do postgrad stuff in Trinity. After graduating, I worked clinically for a while. I then while I was working clinically, I did a diploma in statistics. Again, at that time, I was the first blind person to do a diploma in statistics, but I did it. Then after that, I started my PhD, and I started teaching in Trinity. After Trinity, I moved to Bournemouth, where I was offered a senior lecturer job. I had been teaching for a few years in Trinity by this stage. So I was offered a senior lecturer job and became the professional lead in Bournemouth. Then I moved to Liverpool, and now I'm the head of occupational therapy in Salford University. So I've moved around a little bit since.
Oh, you've done so much, and like that you got scalds as well. That's like amazing. And you were the first occupational therapist student to get scalds, which is great. Yeah. That's so like inspired. Like I hope that more students with disabilities go for scalds. Like I know myself, I was like, I definitely won't be able to get it, or to be honest, I didn't know scalds was a thing until I was in third year, so I was a bit late in that sense.
I think the piece of learning from this is that if it weren't for that lecturer, I wouldn't have thought of going for it. If it weren't for her persistence, because I was so fed up of telling me, "Are you going to do school? Are you going to do school?" That I ended up just saying, "Yes, I signed up for it." I didn't think I was going to get it. I don't think I'm that much different from other people. I just had somebody who had absolute faith in me. She was convinced that I'd be able to do it, totally convinced. And I don't know why she thought, I had done well in my first year. But in my first year, I was terrified of asking for support. So I'd very secretly or quietly go up to the lecturers and say, hello, I'm very sorry, I can't see. So that means, I can't see what's on the board. And at that time, it was the good old overhead projector slides. And I missed huge chunks of lectures because lots of lecturers didn't, scribbled as they went along, or couldn't give me copies of their slides or their overheads or anything like that. It was before PowerPoint. It was well before virtual learning environments. Not all lecturers had email addresses, and this isn't the dark ages, I'm not that old. So it was a very different setup. Everything was in hard copy. They were all books and journals. And so I worked with this really lovely and amazing reader. She was a volunteer because, again, there wasn't the funding to get things. So she would record things onto old cassette tapes. Then I would take it and have this and this and this. And she would spend hours reading things onto tape. And if it weren't for her, I wouldn't, not skulls aside, I wouldn't have got through my degree. So it's a pity that it was due to volunteers, but thank you, Helen, you did a wonderful job of getting me through my degree. And sometimes it's hard for us to have faith in ourselves. Sometimes we need somebody to say, what about? Why don't you? Have a go. And it was the reason why that lecturer was so keen is because 2 of her children had gone to Trinity and had done SCOL, and she saw the difference that it made to their lives. So she was really keen. And yeah, if it wasn't for her, it wouldn't have dawned on me. Wouldn't have thought of it. But then I suppose the bar was set quite high because I was the first OT scholar. I kind of felt, oh my goodness, I have to get a first now, don't I? So after that, I was like, okay, I have to get a first. I have to get a first. And so now I'm a lecturer and obviously have been for quite a while. And so if somebody comes to me and says, I want to get a first, I say, why? You don't need a first. First isn't the be all and end all. Knowing in the back of my mind that I was a student who wanted to get a first. Having said that, I was in no way all about the academic side. Trinity is a wonderful place. There are lots of pretty cool societies. There are some amazing things. I met my husband through a group that I was involved in college.
That's great.
Some of my strongest friends through things that I did in university. So I think that we have to embrace the student life, every bit of it. And that certainly is what I have. Yeah, of course, I remember my lectures and my teaching and exams and all that kind of stuff. But I most remember the social side and the fun we had. And yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think like some students do focus heavily on the academics and kind of forget about what makes college experience so much better than just academics, like getting involved. And sometimes you do like need that push of a friend or a push of a lecturer to be encouraging, to say you can do this. And I know you said that you were officer for students with disabilities and students union. I was also officers for students with disability in the students union.
Well, I changed the name of that. So
oh, did you?
Before I was, it was called the Disabled Rights Officer. And okay. I felt uncomfortable with that language. So not uncomfortable with rights, but sometimes rights suggest wrongs. And I didn't think that was a way of changing attitudes. Yeah. Bearing in mind this is in the mid to late 90s. And I also think that we needed to be for something, not against something. So we needed to highlight that disabled students or students with disabilities have, there are particular things that make access, for example, more difficult, and that we needed to be pro-engaging students as opposed to rights. We're shouting about our rights. Our rights are very important, and I'm not disputing that, but I think as a negotiation, we need to talk about what we as disabled people can offer, because we have a wealth of experience that we can offer. Going back to participation in societies and things, I think that's really important for all students, but disabled students in particular, because we need to build our CVs. Everybody needs to build their CV, but it's not just about CV, it's also about, we need to learn who we are as people. And it's the extracurricular stuff that helps us more to learn who we are as people. And so now I'm an occupational therapist, and I'm an occupational therapy academic. And I now have the theory to put around that, and the theory to explain why it's so important for us in occupational therapy, or occupational science, we would call it occupational balance. So we need to not, if we're just focused in one thing, we become less and less productive in that thing. So having a range of different things to be thinking about. If you're in the middle of a swimming pool, swimming, you're going to be thinking about that lecture or that assignment at the same time. If we're thinking about the assignment all the time, then we become less and less productive at it. So there's a lot of science, and there's a lot of good reasons why it's healthier for us. We all know that it supports our mental health, that it's healthier and also helps us be more productive. So those students who come to me now and say, I want to get a first, and I'm going to do nothing other than work to get a first, I'm saying that you're not going to get a first that way. The way, if you really want to get a first, then you need to bring in all of your other experiences, but you need to engage in those experiences first. Go volunteer, go do interesting things, contribute to the community, because that will enhance your thinking, and it will also enhance your productivity.
Yeah, that's actually such like a good point, especially from like an occupational therapist point of view of things. But like, yeah, if you're going in with just mindset of I want to get it first, like, and then say if you achieve that or you don't achieve that, you'll be looking back on like missed experiences or things that you could have been doing, and like having a good balance is so important.
I did get my first, and I was happy with my first, and I got a gold medal, which is all very nice. Has that influenced my career? Possibly, but it's not the be all and end all that people think it is. And as an academic, that's terrible, isn't it? Me saying, oh, it doesn't matter what you get in your degree. A good degree, so a 2-1 or a first, is really helpful if you want to go straight into an academic, into a master's or a PhD. But I teach occupational therapy. At heart, I'm an occupational therapist, and so I wouldn't be encouraging people to go straight into academia. I would be encouraging people to go and work for a while, to get a bit of life experience, to certainly work as an occupational therapist. So therefore, what you actually get in terms of grades doesn't matter. And maybe it's easy for me to say as somebody who did get a first, but
no, I don't
normally tell my students that I got a first.
Oh, really?
Don't worry about what you get in your degree.
Yeah, that'll probably put some pressure. Yeah, no, I think, yeah, a lot of people would be like, oh, get a first. Like, I've only started myself being like, oh, I could potentially get a first, but I think it's more that I've maybe like self-doubt that I wouldn't be able to do that. But if you have the right mindset, I presume any students, if they work hard and they get the right supports, that they can achieve anything. And if you don't get first or you get something else, like you still went to college and you still got a degree.
You need to get your degree. That's important. Not everybody, a degree isn't for everybody. Some people withdraw, and that's okay too. That's fine too, because university isn't for everybody. But aspiring for some, so what is a first? 70% or above. That's a random number plucked up from somewhere. Actually, sorry, my screen went off.
I think
I'm running out of charge, so I'm just going to plug in while we're here. It's very random, aiming for some arbitrary number. Why not enjoy life? It's the learning that's important. The grade, you can answer the wrong question and not get the grade you want. It's all totally arbitrary. And as an employer, I would employ somebody who has all of the soft skills, all of the other skills. Not, I have employed people. I've never employed somebody based on what kind of degree they have.
Yeah, that's very like interesting to know, because like, as I was saying, like people do kind of just focus on one thing, but it seems to be all of the extra stuff and everything that kind of makes you who you are and what you're interested in. That's what seems employers would want. So that's kind of encouraging anyway. So I have a question about what inspired you to study occupational therapy, and what inspired you to become a lecturer in occupational therapy.
So as I was growing up, I knew I wanted to work with people. I don't know why, but I just decided I wanted to work with people. And I thought about something like nursing for a while and medicine and those things. And my parents in particular said, no, you can't do that as a blind person or a partially sighted person, as I was then, because they'd give me examples like, oh, you wouldn't be able to see to take stitches out, or you wouldn't be able to see to tell if somebody had a rash, or you wouldn't be able to see to do things. So I realised that I couldn't. I was under the impression, I suppose, that it would be tricky to do some of the health sciences. And then I thought, well, what are the other options? And so the therapies came to mind. And I did know blind physiotherapists. At the time, there was still a school for blind physiotherapists. And I wasn't keen on going down the route that blind people go down. But then a friend of the family is an occupational therapist, and she said, well, why don't you come and do work experience? And I did work experience with her in Kappa Hospital. And while I was there, there was a 4th year Trinity student on placement. And so I sat down and spoke to this student, and this student told me about what occupational therapy is, but the theory and the philosophy. So she drew out and explained the theoretical base, and I thought, wow, this is brilliant. And all of the occupational therapists that I met in that one very small setting, they were all happy. They were all enjoying their job, and they were making a difference to these people's lives. And I could tell, and I thought, God, I want a bit of that. And I thought, each day when I came home, I thought, I could be this happy for the rest of my life. Wow, what kind of a career would that be? So I looked into it more. I did more work experience in lots of different areas. Obviously, I had doubts as to whether I could do it as a blind person. I raised those doubts with various people. The friend of the family was entirely supportive and was also very realistic and said, well, maybe there are some areas that would be a bit tricky. So then it was absolutely what I was going to do. I wanted to do occupational therapy. So that's why I did it. I loved practice. The reason why I became a lecturer is because the then head of occupational therapy, who's since passed away, who was just wonderful, he phoned me up in my day job one day, said, I think I can make a job for you. Will you come and we'll pay you to do your PhD? So there's gift horses. He had supervised my undergraduate research, and my undergraduate research actually was about the experience of disabled students. And I was looking at disabled student and academic staff perceptions of what enables success. And what I found in my undergraduate research was that actually academics and disabled students are coming from very different perspectives, almost like a medical model versus a social model view. Okay. And as long as they were coming at things from very different perspectives, they were never going to be able to meet in the middle, because if the disabled students are saying it's the environment that's the problem and the academics are saying it's you that's the problem, there was no common language, which was, I think, part of the problem. So anyway, Paul asked me if I wanted to do my PhD and do a bit of teaching on the side. So it was a gift horse. And because I had Skull, I then had access to my rooms on campus, and it just felt like a really great thing to do. I was probably always interested a bit in teaching. So yeah, that's how it started. I did miss clinical work, and that's why it was wonderful a few years later when I started working for the Disability Service, because that became a bit like my clinical work. But yeah, fundamentally, I do love OT, occupational therapy. I think it's an amazing profession. I love the philosophy and the history and the theory that goes with it. So it's a thinking profession, and that really suits me. So yeah, I became a lecturer. Then when I finished my PhD, I was offered this very nice job in Bournemouth, which I did for several years, and then moved on eventually to where I am now, which is, as I said, head of occupational therapy in Salford.
Oh, so you've literally, yeah, I've more questions from, yeah, no, I'll actually go straight on to this question about the University of Salford. So I said that you're currently a lecturer there, and how are you finding that? And do you feel like there's much difference between accessibility in the United Kingdom and Ireland?
There are big differences between access in the UK and Ireland, and they're fundamentally related to money. So there is a much more straightforward disabled students grant in the UK, and for work there's the Access to Work scheme, which has paid over the years for me to have an assistant. So that means that where there are things that are inaccessible to me, unfortunately, there's lots of the world that is still inaccessible, I can get an assistant to really help with that. And that's made a big difference over the years. That wasn't an option. I did have it while I was a student in Trinity. There was support for a disabled student, but there isn't much support, financial support, to enable disabled staff, and that's an ongoing issue, and we're never going to have an equal playing field until those social policies change. So there are certain things that are just more difficult as a disabled person, and unless we have some way of, as I say, levelling the playing field, it's always going to be more difficult, and it always will be more difficult. That's just the nature of life. But for me, Access to Work levels that so much, so that instead of me spending hours and hours and hours trying to use an inaccessible system to upload lectures or whatever, I can hand that over to my assistant, who can do it like a sighted person in 5 minutes. So that's a huge difference. Differences between Salford and Trinity. So Salford is the 4th university now that I've worked as a lecturer. All universities are different. I have only recently joined Salford. I joined on the 30th of March, so post-lockdown. So the biggest difference I'm noticing is everything is online, but that's not a difference between Salford and any other university. That's between now and pre-COVID. I think that there are lots of young, new universities in the UK, and they are slightly different from Trinity. We used to have the joke in Trinity about it took us 500 years to get here, so it'll take us 500 years to change anything. I love Trinity. I think Trinity is wonderful. But some of the other universities, so universities in my experience in the UK, are far more bureaucratic. And again, it's a while since I've been teaching in Ireland, so things change. There's a lot more paperwork, there's a lot more. So to be able to teach, I had to have a teaching qualification. I had been teaching in Trinity for 7 years before moving over, and I didn't have a teaching qualification. For me to supervise doctoral students, I had to have a qualification in doctoral supervision. And so there's a lot of that kind of stuff, the bureaucracy. There's a lot of risk assessment and some of those kinds of things that are in place. But there's also, because it's there are more people. So we have meetings of all of the heads of subject in all of the universities. There are only 4 in Ireland. So I don't know. I hope they meet up, but I don't know. Whereas in the UK, there are 40 something. So that's a big meeting. There are conferences are bigger, that things are just bigger because there's more people. So that does make a difference to the universities. It isn't a case of everybody knowing everybody, whereas it kind of is in Ireland, which I love and I miss. But
like I suppose I was just curious about, would there have been like that much of a difference? Because I know like Trinity have obviously made positive changes to be, more accessible, and like hopefully other colleges are too. So I was wondering, was there like a massive, but obviously when it comes to funding, that does kind of like, I say if the funding was there, that them changes would be made.
Yeah, so I do think that funding, but I think the funding is much more of an issue for staff rather than students.
Okay.
So I think that is much more of a difference between staff and students. I think that there probably are differences, but I think the biggest difference, say from when I was a student in Trinity, and if I were a student now in any of the other universities, is actually technology has changed. So when I was a student, it was difficult to get sensible screen readers that worked with things, whereas now you can go into Windows, any Windows, and turn, what narrator is the built-in screen reader in Windows, and that's functional. I get an iPad off the shelf. iPads didn't exist when I was in university. Get an iPad off the shelf and turn voiceover on. Can get a phone. The technology now is more widespread and more accessible. So, when I was in college, I was still laughing at people's phones ringing on the bus. Then we went through a phase of phones not really being accessible because their screens weren't easy to use. Then texting came in, and that was totally useless for the blind community. Very helpful for the deaf community, but useless for the blind community. then things started to become accessible. So slowly we now have technology that is much more accessible. That the system that I use in Salford accessibility tests all of my lectures and will tell me if I have diagrams or pictures that aren't captioned. That's wonderful. That raises awareness. So that's not university to university, that's just equality catching up, maybe.
Yeah, no, I definitely like, especially with like technology, keep like advancing. Like, if they're leaving certain groups behind, then there's no point. Like, you might as well be sticking to something that goes well and works for everyone, not just the latest thing. So they have to, like, definitely for even like for education and stuff, like there needs to be, like, I think now only like some social media apps now have like captioning options, which like is amazing for the deaf community. So I really appreciate it. But like, for that to be like so kind of like slow on, like, not on the, like, it's like it's not that important if it's only being done now, when there's other places that, like TV streaming sites, they all have captioning. Why is some other
but not audio description?
Yeah.
So many tweets and Facebook things are all images and they're not accessible, and that is something, and that is an awareness stuff. It doesn't take 2 seconds to type what the image is of, and so that's an issue that continues, that audio description is what's required to make videos accessible for blind people, and that's rare. It's unfortunately rare, which means that a whole load of things are still not as accessible as they need to be.
Yeah, like I've only been seeing now, I don't know if it's more people that I'm following on like Twitter and stuff, but I do see them saying like image description, and like even if I'm sending anything into like a group chat, I tend to like don't send a screenshot of anything and just say what I was going to say. Like, it might be easier for me to just screenshot and send it there, but for a person who is blind or has a visual impairment, that's like not accessible for them. So it's kind of making the choices to be more inclusive and not just taking the easier way of doing things.
Absolutely.
I have a question on, well, I don't think you've had, you don't seem to let your blindness get in the way of your career, but have you had any doubts about yourself as a person who's blind, or doubts about your career as a person with blindness?
I think everybody has doubts about their careers regardless. So if we don't have doubts, then we're probably arrogant and complacent and need to sort ourselves out. Yeah. I think that imposter syndrome is out there, and so of course I have doubts about whether I can do things, but it's not fair to say that's all because I'm blind. Maybe it's because I'm a bit disorganized sometimes, or maybe it's because I'm too keen to talk and I don't listen enough. Maybe it's because, so there's a whole load of facets of my personality or me that could make me think, oh, I wonder if I'll be able to. And blindness is one of those. It's an important one of those, but it's not the be all and end all. There's so many other things that make us who we are. And I think it's very easy to jump to the conclusion that, oh, as a blind person, I can't. Or actually, it's not because I'm blind, it's because I'm not particularly good at something. I'm terrible with numbers. Okay at statistics, okay at concepts of numbers, but remembering the cost of a pint of milk is just not something I find easy to do. That's nothing to do with blindness. That's just part of who I am. And I compensate for that. I can't sing. I'd love to be able to sing. I'll have to compensate for that. So we're compensating for who we are in so many different ways that being blind is just a bit more obvious. I'm also quite tall, and the world isn't designed for somebody who's 6 foot tall, a woman who's 6 foot tall. Clothes aren't designed, and I'm always having to get a workaround for that. So the world is designed as it is, and we all have to fit in with it. So of course I've had imposter syndrome. Of course I've gone through those things. Yes, when I was a student occupational therapist and in practice, more of those concerns were because I was blind rather than because of being tall or anything. Although I actually did have some things. Being tall and quite slight makes moving and handling a bit difficult. when I was supporting people who had had a stroke and trying to support them from place to place, actually being a bit shorter and a bit chunkier would have been easier. But anyway, so yes, of course I've had doubts. There are still things that are difficult. Life is just a bit more challenging sometimes. I'd love to be able to just pick up a book and read it. I've got a shelf full of beautiful books. Half of them have got their spine broken because they've been scanned in for me. Half of them are kind of intact. I'd love to be able to go over to the shelf, pick one up and read it. I'd love to be able to get in a car and drive to work. I'd love to be able to do certain things. But I'd also like to be able to sing. There are lots of things that we can and can't do in life, and unless we work with who we are right now, as we are, we're never going to get anywhere. So I am who I am. There are certain aspects of occupational therapy practice that I wouldn't do, that I don't feel safe doing, and that's okay, because I can do an awful lot of other things. And just like if you go for a job, you don't expect to be able to do 100% of it perfectly. That's the same for me. And part of it is because of me as a person, and yeah, part of it is because I'm blind. So of course, yes, loads of doubts. But then you need workarounds for them, because sitting in a pool of self-doubt doesn't really get you anywhere, does it?
No, yeah, that's actually like such a good point, because I think like even like myself, like if I think of some things I'm not good at, I'm like, oh, maybe it's because of my hearing. But like there is also just so many things that
it is, and maybe it isn't.
Yeah, but like it shouldn't be the whole blame. But I get what you're saying, like you'd like to do this or do that, but like I suppose if you've had blindness for so long, and me having hearing loss for so long and not knowing really, well obviously I have cochlear implants, so I am lucky that I can switch on and switch off. Like some people aren't as, you know, lucky. But you know, even people saying about like singing in the shower and stuff like that, and like I can't hear in the shower and stuff like that, but that's like one small option, and there's so many other things that I can do. Or even like considering like jobs, I was like, oh, I can't do any jobs that would require me, you know, ringing on the phone and stuff like that, because like I can't see their faces. And but then you know, there's so many other things that I can do, or there should be other options where, you know, I can FaceTime or Zoom as person, so that's more accessible to me. So
there were aspects of my clinical work that I couldn't safely do. So one of those things, so I used to work out how people could get around their mobility, and I used to do a lot of powered mobility using powered wheelchairs for people, which was great. I couldn't possibly assess somebody's safety, because they'd have to assess somebody's safety, you have to let them go ahead, negotiate all sorts of curbs and lampposts, and go into a shop, buy something from the shop and come back out walking several meters behind them. No way could I do that. I couldn't, you know, me and the guide dog trying to trying to avoid the lamppost that I didn't know was there while somebody is miles ahead. That would have been totally unsafe. So I had to have the conversation, or I had the conversation with my team, employers, and said, right, I can't do this. And so I did a whole load of other stuff. So I did a lot of splinting, which is making splints for people's hands or whatever. There's always things that you can do. And so even in a job, if you look at the whole job, even now as an academic, there are certain parts of the job that are not easy for me as a blind person. But that's part of that job. So I do a job swap. I get somebody else to do that part, and I do that another part. And it's about us working out where our strengths are. It makes loads of sense to do job swaps in teams because of personalities too. There might be somebody else in the team that is brilliant on the phone. Let them do all the phone calls. You do all the other stuff. You might have other skills in other areas. So I was very lucky in my first job. So I had a very, very good manager. He was just amazing, an excellent occupational therapist, and just the best manager. And that gave me permission. He did so many really clever things. So one of the things he did before I started, and I only knew about this a long time later, is he put signs up in the kitchen, tea bags here, coffee here, sugar here, and things. And I had no idea that these signs were there. But he had told everybody that make sure that you leave things in the right place. All I knew was I went into the coffee room, I took my cup, the tea bags were always there, I took a tea and did. Without that little tea bags here, I would have been faffing around trying to find tea bags every time. That enabled my dignity. That enabled me to be an equal with my colleagues. That tiny little tea bags here, but the thought, and I had no idea that he did any of this. And he let me make decisions about what I could and couldn't do. So then I was responsible for making those decisions. And it was okay then to say, no, I don't feel safe doing that, because that's the responsible thing to do. Because there are certain things that wouldn't be safe for me to do. And so I don't do them.
Yeah, that's, yeah, like it's just even like that's a thing of just having like even the signs there, like, you know, it might just seem like a small thing to them, but actually just makes such a big difference for you to just be independent and not having to ask someone where the tea bags are or sorting it out for you. Like, so that's really good. And like,
it was subtle, and it maintained my dignity and my ability to just get on and do things. And as I say, I had no idea that those signs were there for years. Yeah, I think that we also need to train people as well. So I need to train people to tell me who they are. So I obviously can't recognise people visually. So if somebody comes to my door, I need them to say, hello, Bethan, it is, whatever. And people sometimes find that really strange, that, you know, they're my best friend. But one of my best friends, she always says, hi, it's Kate. And there's always that thing about her. And that's great. So immediately I'm on the right page. And I have to train students to do that as well, because I have lots of people coming to my door and saying, you know, asking me for things. And if I don't know who you are, I'm going to be lost for the first half of the conversation. And I guess you have similar experiences, Courtney, but when you're always trying to fill in the pieces, it's tiring. It's exhausting. Yes. So, and I think that there's a lot of overlap between blind people and deaf people in this. We're getting part of the social picture. We're getting an important part. We can trust what we're picking up on, but that isn't the full picture, and it's tiring to build up, to make that full picture. That's really quite hard. So we need to give ourselves a bit of leeway for that. We need to tell people, hold on a minute, if we have meetings for this long, that's too tiring. Or if I have to read piles and piles and piles of stuff, that's not going to be doable. And we build our workarounds. And my experience with people, once you explain to people, that people are fine normally. Not always, but normally.
Yeah, like I say at the start, they're just like, oh wait, why do I have to do that? But then, you know, once they kind of know like how even just the smallest subtle thing to do, like the tea bags stuff, like it just does make such a difference. And like just continuing on doing stuff like that, even introducing yourself, that is like, yeah. And I get that it is exhausting trying to fill in the pieces. Like I went about my whole like secondary school kind of like pre-preparing, trying to figure out what somebody's going to say and like predict what someone's going to say and have my response ready. Or like, yeah, but like technically I didn't need to do all them things. I could have just said, hello, I'm Courtney, I'm profoundly deaf, I struggle with hearing, could you repeat that? But we learn.
When we're young, we're trying to fit in, and we're frantically trying to fit in, and it's too much to expect of our young selves to have been able to do that. Our young selves were already dealing with a lot of stuff. They were dealing with all of the teenage stuff. They were dealing with trying to work out where we fit in the world, trying to work out whether could I do this dream job that I want to do as a disabled person. And so I think maybe I would be harsh on my young self for not being as open. I'd always say, oh, my sight isn't very good, or I'm partially sighted. I'm registered blind and have been for a long time. So actually now, and I suppose for me, one of the big come out moments was when I got my guide dog. First of all, I realised it's possible to walk down the street and daydream at the same time. That was a revelation to me. I never knew that you could do that. And that gave me so much of my thinking space back, because all of the time I was concentrating on wondering, am I going to hit something? What's in front of me? How do I work my way around this while not looking like I couldn't see? How do I, keeping up this facade? Then I got my guide dog, and suddenly it was like, oh, I can just walk, and then I can daydream and I can plan my day like everybody else does. So I don't think we should be hard on our young selves. I used to listen to the sound of chalk on the blackboard in school to hear what was being written on the board. That's what I used to do to try. Madness, absolute madness. And I have a son now who is in school who's got the same eye condition as me. He's partially sighted at the moment. He's an iPad. And so he just like looks at his iPad and can tell what's on the board. It's a different world, a different world. And then he changes the teacher's screen for the teacher.
So I'm going to be on my last question now, and then we'll be finished up with the interview. What advice or words of encouragement would you have for students with disabilities who may feel discouraged that they will succeed outside of college because of their disability?
So I think we're all people, and disability is part of who you are, but it's only a part of who you are. As a disabled person, you will have so many extra strengths, so many extra skills from the mere management of life that you have to do. So I have friends who use personal assistants. That's management. That's a management skill, managing personal assistants. I've always described myself as really resourceful, because we have to become resourceful, because we have to do workarounds, because of the world isn't as accessible as it is, as we want it to be. We have to become good communicators, because actually we can't just communicate the basics, we also need to communicate how the world needs to change. We can be advocates for ourselves. So those skills, you shouldn't underestimate those skills. And I'm quite pro disclosing disability. You know, here I am, take me or leave me. And I know that's easy for me as an academic in a senior responsible position who's got a very stable job, thank you very much, who is in some ways made it in what I wanted to do. I'm in my ideal job now. However, I didn't make it because I'm blind, and I didn't make it despite being blind. I made it as me, and me, I am who I am, and the world's just got to deal with that, just as I have to deal with that. So that's the biggest message. Take yourself for who you are, learn who you are, learn your strengths, and explain your strengths, and don't hide the weaknesses. You know, there's a theory of leadership called where we think of weaknesses as overdone strengths. So if you're confident, that's a strength. If you're overconfident, you're arrogant, that's a weakness. So that idea of our strengths being our weaknesses being overdone strengths. So think about your weakness. So what is it that you can't do, and transform it. How do you manage that? How do you function? And that will enable you to have strength, to find your strengths. The other thing is that we can't all be good at everything, and that's okay. So we are where we are who we are, go with it, and find something that suits you. It's out there, the world is a very diverse place. There will be the right thing, and it can be really frustrating waiting for it, but go get it. Go find what suits you.
Thank you, Bethan. I think that would be very helpful when students watch this. I think like I'm very pro to disclosing their disability as well, because I've been on the other end of trying to keep it a secret. So when I went to college, I was very I'm profoundly deaf and this is just who I am, and it actually did help. Like, you know, I wouldn't have went for officer of students with disabilities. I wouldn't have worked in the disability service at all, like if I wasn't engaging in the supports or getting involved or wanting to, you know,
it's
enhance.
It's very tiring pretending to be something that you're not. If you're a disabled person, that's who you are. If you have mental health issues, that's who you are. And there are real strengths with all of the disability, with any, and obviously this is really hard because if somebody is in chronic pain all the time, you kind of go, how on earth is that a strength? But that people function and that people are able to function just shows that there's so much more kind of about you. And it's important to hold that to heart and to just go for what you want, you know. And when I'm saying yes, disclose, when I So my son, sorry, I know we're talking too much. My son is very comfortable in his own skin as a partially sighted person. And so what he does is when he goes into coffee shops and says, excuse me, please, do you have this menu in large print? Because my mummy's blind and I'm partially sighted and I can't read this. Do you know, if you made this in large print, it would help all the older people as well that are coming in.
Oh.
And there are ways of it disclosing, and there are ways of asking support that aren't needy and aren't bratty. So I'll say, right, I'm going to struggle with assessing powered mobility. I'll do splinting instead. That's a very empowering, that's a very, I'm not knocking myself down. I'm saying, this is not my strength, this is, let me do more of my strengths and fewer of my weakness areas. And those are the kinds of negotiations rather than gimme, 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 which just turns people off.
Yeah, that's very, very, very good points. Thank you, Bethan, for being able to be interviewed, and it was lovely to chat with you, and I've definitely learned so much, and I'm very interested in occupational therapy now that I keep hearing about. I before didn't know what occupational therapy was until I started working with a few when I was intern, and the profession just seems so interesting. I don't know why
Wonderful.
I didn't consider doing it, but
you can do a master's. You can do a master's degree in occupational therapy. 2-year master's.
Do you have to study it for undergrad?
No, you can do any undergraduate degree and then do a 2-year master's program. There are a few different options. How about you email me after? It's a wonderful. It's a very interesting profession for a disabled person because we tend to work with people with disabilities. So as a disabled person myself, I think it's a really interesting profession because I can kind of see both sides. I'd like more disabled people to become occupational therapists because part of it is about advocating for social and physical changes as well. So yeah, it's a wonderful profession. It's brilliant.
Yeah, I'll pop you an email if we'll see with my research if that's what I decide. But thank you so much, Bethan. And
no problems.
Okay, bye.